deepest condolences on his passing, and wish for him to have God's light perpetually shine on him. Any words?
Mr. President, thank you very much. I will not be long, as of course, Justice Fort was not a member of this chamber, which is usually the circumstance in which we give more extended tributes. But I would rise to join you in extending sympathies to our former colleague, former Senator Marlene Malahoo Fort, who now sits in that other place, on the passing of her dear husband, even as we extend to the wider family and indeed the legal and judicial fraternity our condolences on the passing of a great legal mind. We do ask that pray rather, that his soul rest in peace and that light perpetual continue to shine, and that indeed those he has left behind are comforted by memories during their time of grief. Thank you.
Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, I also want to extend my condolences to the family of the now late Ian Ford. It struck me this morning that our greats are really passing, because just a couple of weeks ago, we were acknowledging the contribution that Hugh Hart had made. One of the things that the legal fraternity has been saying about the passing of former President of the Court of Appeal, Ian Ford, is how much he mentored them, especially when he was at the DPP, giving young people all sorts of opportunities, even to make submissions, prepare submissions for the Privy Council. I know that he had a tremendous impact on the students at the law school, and there were quite a few people who were tutored by him. I want to say in particular to his widow, these words that you have to use so suddenly just really shock you. How sorry I am, because I know that we used to have conversations, since we are both married to older men, and we used to talk a lot about what was happening in our families. So I feel it personally for her, and I extend my condolences, not just on my own behalf, but on behalf of the entire team. May his soul rest in peace.
Thank you very much. All right, statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate are the following: annual report and audited financial statements of the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority for the financial year 2022-2023. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Spectrum Management Authority for the financial year 2023-2024. Annual report of the University of the West Indies Mona campus for the academic year 2024-2025. Integrity Commission's investigation reports into concerns that the following officers employed to the Clarendon Municipal Corporation failed to file their statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to law and their indicative rulings. 1, Mr. Rohan Sherwood, a project officer, and 2, Mr. Sheldon Allison, a compliance officer. Integrity Commission's investigation reports into concerns that the following officers formerly employed to the Cannabis Licensing Authority failed to file their statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to the law and their indicative rulings. 1, Mr. Dwight Bailey, a Director of Human Resource Management and Development, and 2, Mr. Philip Chambers, a Senior Director of Operations. The Integrity Commission's investigation report into concerns that Mr. Ricardo Monroe, a manager, public-private partnership and privatization, employed to the Development Bank of Jamaica, failed to file his statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023 contrary to law and its indicative ruling. Report of investigation concerning allegations of corruption, impropriety, and irregularities in the grant, variation, and revocation of firearm licenses and storage of firearms and ammunition at the Firearm Licensing Authority. Integrity Commission's investigation reports into concerns that the following officers employed to the Forestry Department failed to file their statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to law and their indicative rulings. 1. Mr. Jason Gordon, a director of Forest Resource Assessment. 2. Mr. Jakes Plummer, a senior compliance and enforcement officer. And 3. Mr. Clovin Daniels, an inventory and stores officer. Integrity Commission's investigation reports into concerns that the following officers failed to file their statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to law and their indicative rulings. 1. Mr. Michael Hurst, a forklift operator, current porter employed to the Bank of Jamaica. 2. Mrs. Michelle Toyloy Carter, an executive director, formerly employed to the Devon House Development Limited. And 3. Ms. Tion Harvey, a temporary audit assistant, formerly employed to the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission. Statement on fiscal performance for the Independent Fiscal Commission for the fiscal year 2025-2026. Bank of Jamaica Monetary Policy Statement for 6 months ended March 2026. Bank of Jamaica Quarterly Monetary Policy Report for the quarters ending February 2026 and May 2026. Auditor General's Department audited financial statements for the Parochial Revenue Fund for the financial year 2023-2024. Auditor General's Department certified appropriation accounts under head 16049 recurrent for the Management Institute for National Development 2024-2025. Annual performance report of the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development for the financial year 2025-2026. And finally, the Ministry Papers number 31 to 34 of 2026 respectively, titled Cabinet Agenda Issues dated February 2, 2026, February 9, 2026, February 16, 2026, and February 23, 2026. Thank you, Mr. President.
I just want to clarify whether or not the report mentioned has been tabled from the Integrity Commission. It's the same report that we were told the presiding officers would not bow and present to the Parliament. Because the President that was gracious in thanking me for raising the question. And I want to ask his permission to extend to Mark Golding and Michael Hilton the thanks for their correct statement of the law in respect to the issue. Thanks very much. Just want to know if that's the same report for which you would not bow.
All right. Bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notes of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to sittings of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the Senate first obtained, And before I get to public business, although I did not see the notes here, but I do recall from the sitting of the Standing Orders Committee, there was a request from Senator Shireen Golden Campbell for her to appear on by IT, right? So I am asking the permission of the Senate for Senator Golden Campbell to so attend. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Welcome, Senator Golden Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And my apologies for not doing this earlier.
No problem, Mr. President. Thank you to my colleagues as well.
Thank you. All right, public business.
Mr. President, today it is intended to take the bill shortly entitled the National Housing Trust Amendment Special Provisions Act 2026 through its second reading and its concluding stages. I want to thank Senator Hill for having taken charge of the bill in my absence, and I will take the second leg of this relay as well as the final one. Thank you, Senator Hill. Mr. President, the bill seeks to amend the National Housing Trust Act to allow for the continuation of the annual special distribution from the National Housing Trust to central government over the 5-year fiscal period starting 26-27, our current fiscal year, through to 2031. 2031. Mr. President, as you may be aware, earlier this year, in February, in fact, the government announced its intention to continue with the annual transfers from the National Housing Trust to central government as part of revised revenue measures. As we debate this bill, Mr. President, to ensure the operationalization of this measure, I want to just start by recalling two very important points. The first being that strategic reallocations of financial resources are necessary from time to time by government. In pursuance of crucial national objectives, a strategic reallocation of financial resources is an appropriate step for which there is significant precedence. In fact, Mr. President, interesting historical fact is that the NHT itself was initially capitalized through allocations from the National Insurance Scheme through an amendment to the National Insurance Act of 1976. Mr. President, secondly, the NHT has previously been used strategically for national priorities and fiscal consolidation. Mr. President, the application of the NHT resources for other national priorities within the context of broader macroeconomic management also has precedent. In the 1990s, under former Prime Minister Patterson, the NHT provided support for an education reform initiative. And in 2013, under former Prime Minister Simpson Miller, in order to meet obligations under the extended fund facility with the International Monetary Fund, the then government took for the first time the step which is against us, again, before us today, that is they directed NHT contributions towards central government for fiscal consolidation in the amount of $11.4 billion. Mr. President, this was effected or facilitated by an amendment to the National Housing Trust Act, the provisions of which then expired in 2017. Mr. President, under the 2016 administration of Prime Minister Holness, given the need for further budgetary support for the government's economic stabilization and reform program, amendments were again made to the NHT Act in August 2017 to facilitate the continuation of annual transfers from the NHT for the fiscal years 2017-18 to 2020-21. And then again, Mr. President, in December 2020, to facilitate annual transfers through to financial year 25-26. Mr. President, in 2020, clearly we would recall the massive economic disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was what required the continuation of the mechanism. Mr. President, it is therefore clearly entirely reasonable to have foreseen that the even more significant economic losses and damage caused by Hurricane Melissa in October of last year would require retention of this mechanism. Mr. President, in reaffirming the government's clear and expressed belief that the NHT funds ought to be used for their intended purpose, that is to increase and enhance Jamaica's stock of available housing, we also reaffirm with confidence that the NHT funds are in fact being put to that use to the greatest extent that they have ever been. Mr. President, this is not to say that more is not required and that more is not always needed, but it is indisputable that this administration has issued more mortgages and started and built more houses than the opposition did in their commensurate time at the wicket. The numbers tell the story. Mr. President, furthermore, in financial year 26-27, notwithstanding the continuation of the transfers, the NHT will invest approximately $50 billion in housing solutions, alongside an additional $21 billion in subsidies to support affordability.
More and more money.
The Trust currently manages more than 41,000 housing solutions across the country, including 10,700 under construction, nearly 6,000 at the contract stage, more than 11,500 in procurement, and 11,600 in current planning and design. I'm sure that colleagues on this side will be happy to share some more about what is being done in the housing sector, as well as some of the more impactful interventions that the NHT has already made to support its mortgage holders who were affected by Hurricane Melissa, and they are significant. Mr. President, in addition, this government has reduced NHT interest rates to the lowest ever. It has transformed and expanded access by contributors, including teachers, nurses, firefighters, and members of our security forces who already benefit from reduced mortgage rates. Very soon, Mr. President, there will be further announcements to be made. Mr. President, our young people, Mr. President, are also seeing increased opportunities. And as of July 1st this year, they will see more, as 20% of the NHT housing solutions will be reserved for persons under 35. Mr. President, contributors in the lowest income earning brackets can pay as low as 0%, Mr. President, under this administration. And for existing homeowners that don't fit into any of these categories, Mr. President, access to financing has also been accelerated through expanded pathways, including expansion of maintenance grants and loans, upgrades, including use of solar systems, Mr. President. And all of this has happened under the administration while undertaking the same transfers. Mr. President, proper leadership, strategic management, and effective planning and operations with the Jamaican people's interests always at the forefront of our minds and always at the heart of our policies have made all the difference. Mr. President, we are doing all that can be done for contributors while maintaining the health of the institution. Arguments that we are watering down the purpose or the mission of the NHT are, in fact, sorely misinformed. Mr. President, I want to also summarily say up front, although I know that some colleagues on my side will also expand on this issue, that the argument which has been raised elsewhere, that discontinuing these distributions would now allow the government to use the NHT to convert those funds to meet the housing demand, that is to close the housing gap. And this argument is also not grounded in Jamaica's realities, Mr. President. Our housing shortages are not solvable purely by access to financing. They are driven by multiple bottlenecks, including, as I said in very brief summary, and I count on my colleagues to expand on these matters, availability of service land, infrastructure constraints, road, water, electricity in the appropriate areas, cost of construction, labor shortages in the construction sector, lengthy planning and approval processes, titling and administration issues. We're tackling these, Mr. President, but these matters are systemic and take time. The reality is that if we did not proceed with the transfers being debated today, those constraints would still subsist even as we seek to solve them, such that the NHT could not instantly convert those funds into housing, while the discontinuation on the other side, Mr. President, would absolutely incontrovertibly have wider immediate negative effect on the population. Mr. President, in response to persons who may ask about the NHT's ability to afford the distributions, I want to assure them, whether they are members of this chamber or not, that the NHT is more than able to sustain the annual $11.4 billion transfers to the government over the medium term, while maintaining adequate cash surpluses. The NHT continues to maintain a strong asset position. In fact, assets exceed liabilities by approximately 1.8 times and will continue to do so over the medium term. Therefore, based on the expected expenditure plans, a strong revenue base and robust asset position, and again, I hope to hear more about this during the debate in more detail, notwithstanding the transfers, Mr. President, it will be able to continue to operate profitably while expanding access to housing. Mr. President, given that Jamaica's fiscal environment has been significantly altered by the passage of Hurricane Melissa, the government reluctantly opted to continue this particular revenue measure. The clear reality, as alluded to earlier, is that beyond the personal experiences of dislocation, loss, and disruption caused by Hurricane Melissa, extensive destruction to critical infrastructure, productive sectors, and public assets have placed severe pressure on the public finances and increased the need for continued recovery spending. Discontinuation of this measure at this time would result in a significant fall-off in government revenues at a time when these funds are needed even more. The alternative would be to cut programs delivering wider benefits or to levy new taxes on the backs of the Jamaican people. Our ability to deliver on the government's economic program in the best and widest interests of all Jamaicans, therefore, continues to rely on these transfers from the NHT to fund expenditures already outlined in the national budget. And I look forward to presentations by colleagues which may expand on details around these realities. Mr. President, allow me to say, by way of context, that I am proud that as a member of this government led by Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, special shout out to Senator Brown, our hallmarks have been integrity, prudence, fiscal responsibility, and care and support for the most vulnerable. It gives me special pleasure. It really does. This government has made strategic investments across all sectors that have demonstrated how good management benefits every single Jamaican. Mr. President, the results are clear. Jamaica is the safest it has been in decades. Our country has achieved the highest agricultural outputs ever. Employment has reached record highs. More hospitals and health centers have been and are being built and renovated, with more doctors and nurses serving our people. More access to potable water and more irrigation of arable land to our farmers have been and are being provided. Mr. President, more access to education and skills training in emerging areas and transportation, safe transportation, being provided for our students. Mr. President, perhaps even more recently, we have cushioned the population from the worst effects of global shocks, including absorption of increases in oil prices through Petrojam subsidies. Mr. President, we do not claim perfection, but it is important that we acknowledge progress made across sectors, even as we continue to be committed to doing more to improve the lives of all Jamaicans, ensuring that we make the best and most widely impactful use of the public purse through strong and purposeful management. This demonstrates through results, Mr. President, through outcomes, that this administration understands how to manage through difficult times. Mr. President, I want to briefly remind members of the wider context of the bill, because despite all that we have achieved, 5 steps forward, Melissa has taken 10 steps back, particularly in the western side of the island. We do need to protect our achievements and gains while having to navigate recovery and rebuilding in the aftermath of a direct hit from one of the strongest storms on records. The task ahead, Mr. President, notwithstanding all that has been done, remains tremendous. It will involve the coordination, careful management, and execution of several very large projects across the length and breadth of the country. These will be delivered through the NARA, the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, through existing institutions, as well as through public-private partnerships operating alongside and in concert with the NARA. Financing will be largely reliant on additional sources beyond the usual sources available, including the historic package being obtained from the international financial institutions, as has been announced. Mr. President, budgeting absolutely cannot be business as usual, and all revenue sources available to the government must be on the table, given the criticality of this time. Mr. President, generally speaking, fiscal realities require prudent and sometimes difficult choices. In circumstances where deficits must be financed, governments are left with limited options: cutting essential services, raising taxes, or responsibly reallocating available resources. In Jamaica's case, it is obvious that large-scale public investment is necessary to provide current circumstances presented by Hurricane Melissa, including the deficits which will occur in ensuing years. Given the significant fiscal pressures in these unprecedented times, the government has therefore decided to extend the NHT drawdown for the next 5 fiscal years. If you will permit me, Mr. President, I'll do a brief clause-by-clause presentation. Mr. President, the bill comprises 3 clauses which make provisions as follows. Clause 1 sets out the short title and construction of the bill, which is cited as the National Housing Trust Amendment Special Provisions Act 2026, and that it must be read and construed as one with the National Housing Trust Act and all amendments thereto. Clause 2 seeks to amend Section 4 of the National Housing Trust Act to allow the NHT to provide financing of up to a maximum annual amount of $11.4 billion for fiscal consolidation in respect of each of the financial years ending respectively on the 31st of March 2027, the 31st of March 2028, 31st of March 2029, 31st of March 2030, and the 31st of March 2031. This clause, Mr. President, also provides that financing in respect of the above may be by way of distribution, grant, or otherwise, as the minister responsible for finance may determine. Clause 3, Mr. President, outlines the duration of the Act, providing that it will continue into force until March 31, 2031, and will then expire. Mr. President, in the circumstances which I have explained to this House, I very much look forward to the due consideration and support of this very important bill by both sides. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister